aliens seeking refuge on Earth. Welcome to another space story, the podcast where we pause the world, drift into the cosmos, and let curiosity carry us beyond the stars. I'm your host, Henry, and I'm thrilled you're tuning in tonight. In this episode, before watching this story, please like, subscribe, and don't forget to press the bell icon so you never miss a discovery. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? What time did you watch this video? Sleep well. Dream far with hope. We dive into a story that blurs the line between savior and survivor. Imagine a knock on Earth's door, not from the seas, not from another nation, but from the stars. They came not to conquer, but to beg, fleeing a war so vast, so devastating, it burns through entire solar systems like dry grass in a wildfire. They were desperate, terrified, and they chose us, Earth, the last safe place, the final ember of hope in a galaxy going dark. Tonight, we explore aliens seeking refuge on Earth. We're the last safe place from a greater galactic threat. This story isn't just about survival. It's about what happens when humanity becomes a haven, and the strange, harrowing truths that follow. So buckle in as we begin with a sky that changed forever on the night they arrived. It started with no warning, at least not one we could recognize. The skies above Earth lit up like spilled mercury, not with fire, not with falling debris, but with geometry. Perfect shapes, glowing in a hue no one could name. Circles that rotated within each other. Lines that vanished and reappeared across continents. It was midnight in Nevada when the first radar blackout was reported. Within 5 minutes, every major air defense system across the globe went blind. Satellites flickered, realigned themselves as if forcibly turned. And then, silence. And then came the voice. It wasn't heard through radio waves or hacked networks. It simply appeared deep in the subconscious of every human being. Not words. Not exactly. More like compressed intention. Like an emotion trying to speak. People dropped to their knees across Paris, Lagos, Sao Paulo, Kyoto, and Chicago. They gasped, cried. Some screamed. Others merely stared at the sky. What we felt was terror, but not ours. Theirs. Whoever, whatever had sent that message was pleading, begging, as if Earth was the last refuge on a galactic map, now burning in real time. The world's governments scrambled to respond. Military units were deployed under the assumption of invasion. Every agency, from NASA to the United Nations, was suddenly buried in reports. But amid the chaos, one thing became very clear. No one was attacking. Instead, they were landing. The first vessel touched down in the Mongolian steppe. It didn't fall or descend. It appeared, folding into existence like a shadow being peeled away from reality. A ship made of something between glass and liquid shimmered under the sun. It was tall, over 70 meters. No weapons visible, no engines, just a single doorway, open and waiting. And what emerged from it changed history. They weren't monstrous. They weren't angels. They weren't anything you could have guessed. They were tired, tall, vaguely humanoid beings with elongated limbs and skin that looked like cracked porcelain, lit from beneath. Their eyes, large, dark and reflective, showed a kind of trauma you couldn't fake. Every gesture they made was careful, as if they were on the verge of shattering. They knelt when they saw humans. They placed their foreheads to the soil. They weren't gods. They were refugees. Over the next 48 hours, 29 more ships appeared across the globe. One in the Australian outback, another near the Amazon. A few hovered over the ocean without landing, as if they feared crushing life below. In each case, the beings emerged slowly, deliberately, unarmed, silent. Their message was always the same, transmitted into the minds of those near them. We fled. We are hunted. You are the last. The governments of Earth didn't know what to do. How do you react when at first the responses varied wildly? Russia declared martial law near the landing zones. China attempted to seize one of the ships, but failed when the vessel simply phased out of their grasp, reappearing half a mile away as if to say, no. The United States, caught between fear and a PR crisis, established observation corridors, allowing scientists and military to study without direct interference. Meanwhile, something strange was happening. None of the aliens attempted to leave the area where they landed. They didn't spread, didn't explore, didn't try to take anything. They simply waited, curled into themselves, glowing faintly like dim lanterns. We later came to understand they were dying, not from wounds, but from fear. A joint task force was established within a week. The United Galactic Refugee Assessment Command, or UGRAC. Scientists, diplomats, and psychologists were all given one mission: understand the visitors, determine the threat, and, if possible, help. That's when we learned the name of their enemy. They called it the Valethi, a word with no direct translation. The closest approximation was the Great Unbeing. It wasn't a species, not entirely. It was a force, a hunger, a principle made real. The visitors described it as something that once had form, but now only consumed. They spoke of stars being devoured, of moons turned inside out, of civilizations screaming into the void with no one left to hear. And the most terrifying part, they said the Valethi couldn't be fought, not because it was too strong, but because it was already here, woven into the fabric of the universe, like mold in the walls of existence itself. Their only hope, they said, was to find a place it hadn't touched yet, a world forgotten by the great maps, a backwater planet where sentient life had emerged too late to be noticed, a place like Earth. That's when theories began to explode. Why Earth? Why hadn't we been found? If the Valethi was so unstoppable, why were we untouched? And then came one of the most disturbing revelations. We might be invisible because we were loud, primitive, and chaotic. It was like hiding in plain sight by being the drunk guy at the bar no one wanted to talk to. Our constant wars, our radiation emissions, our unpredictable ecology. It made Earth the last place the Valethi would ever look. And suddenly, our dysfunction became our shield. But not everyone was convinced. Skeptics believed it was all a ruse, that the aliens were scouts for an invasion, or that the Valethi was a story to manipulate us into submission. Some pointed out that humanity had finally reached a spacefaring threshold. Perhaps this was an elaborate test to judge our readiness. Others asked darker questions. What if they weren't running from the Valethi? What if they brought it with them? What followed were weeks of silence from the alien visitors. They stopped communicating, stopped glowing. Some appeared to fall into deep trances. A few even cracked, literally. Their bodies split apart like dried clay, revealing no organs, no blood, just more light. They weren't biological in the way we understood, and we still don't know if they ever slept. These weren't just hallucinations. Sleep labs confirmed that the brain waves of those dreaming synced with each other, regardless of nationality, language, or age. Something was leaking from the visitors into us. Or maybe they were trying to show us what they'd seen. Then one day, one of the ships moved. It didn't rise. It didn't fly. It just opened, unfolded into a spiral of shifting walls, revealing a core that seemed to reflect every viewer's memories back at them. People fainted. Animals fled. Satellites malfunctioned. And in the center of the spiral was a single object. A sphere. Small, plain, black. It hovered silently before shattering into dust. And when it did, gravity spiked across the planet for exactly 3.9 seconds. Ocean tides jumped by 15 feet, and the moon twitched. Yes, You heard me right. The moon twitched. And just like that, the ship closed again. Obsessive. Humanity was left shaken, terrified, more unified than ever, and more divided. Was that a warning? A demonstration? A call? What was the sphere? Who were these aliens really? And when Earth is the last refuge, what happens when the Velethi finally notice us? The moon twitch wasn't a metaphor. Within hours, dozens of observatories and amateur astronomers confirmed the same anomaly. For a moment, less than a second, the moon appeared to shift slightly on its axis, by a fraction of a degree. That might sound small, but in orbital mechanics, it was the equivalent of your heart skipping a beat mid-pump. Governments scrambled to contain the news. NASA issued a press release blaming a sensor recalibration error. China simply denied anything had occurred. But people weren't stupid, especially not the ones who had been dreaming. Those near the alien landings had begun forming online communities, calling themselves the Tuned. Not in a cultish sense, at least not at first. These were scientists, engineers, linguists, psychologists, people desperate to make sense of what they were experiencing. They posted sketches of what they'd seen in their shared dreams. Cities bent in impossible geometries, eyes the size of mountains, peering out from broken stars, voices made of music and decay, and they all described the same sound. A slow, resonating thrum, like an ancient bell being struck underwater. It was coming from the sky, they said, and it was getting louder behind closed doors. A secret branch of UGREC, codenamed Project Hinterglass, was making contact with the aliens in ways no one had authorized. While the public saw the refugee beings as helpless survivors, Hinterglass saw them as one thing only: technology. They weren't interested in peace. They were interested in leverage. A private military coalition, backed by interests from 5 of the G20 nations, began experimenting with alien matter extracted from one of the fractured bodies of a dying refugee. They called the substance hyperporcelain, but its actual makeup defied classification. It was simultaneously liquid and solid, with non-Newtonian mass that changed depending on who observed it. Yes, who observed it. Hinterglass built a lab beneath Antarctica, deep enough to avoid satellite detection. They started experimenting with induced quantum state changes using thought patterns alone. And that's when things started to go wrong. Period. The lead researcher, Dr. Mahira Tulsani, a brilliant Indian-born quantum neurologist, began speaking in her sleep in languages no human had ever spoken. Not glossolalia, real syntax, real structure. When linguists cross-compared her mutterings With the neural emissions of the refugee aliens, they found a 98% match. She was tuning in. It wasn't long before the first incident. During a routine test of the hypoporcine under EMF isolation, the entire lab's time index desynchronized. It lasted 13.2 seconds. During that time, surveillance showed that everyone inside the lab moved independently from local time. Their movements were smooth, non-linear, and somehow anticipatory, as if they were experiencing the present while reacting to a different timeline entirely. When the sync restored, no one remembered a thing. Well, almost no one. Dr. Tulsani emerged from the lab trembling. She didn't speak for an hour. When she finally did, she said something no one could explain. We weren't meant to be seen. That's why Earth was safe. That's why we survived. But now we've looked back, and the Valethi is looking too. About to be great. Back on the surface, the alien refugees began to stir. Until now, they had remained near their ships, barely moving. But something had changed. Their glow intensified. Their gestures became quicker. And perhaps most disturbingly, they began to mimic humans. At first, it was subtle. A nod here, a tilted head. But within days, they began to mirror the speech and posture of the people near them. Not mocking at all. Almost like they were trying to become us. One refugee in Mali, nicknamed Shale by locals, spoke aloud for the first time. Its voice was eerie, modulated, but distinctly human. Fear is the path that ends the traveler. We need your chaos. It hides you. It hides us. That quote spread like wildfire across the web. Memes. Merch. But some people took it very, very seriously. Because if chaos was a shield, then predictability was a beacon. Suddenly, all those systems we'd spent decades building, AI networks, satellite chains, surveillance nets, social pattern algorithms, they all started to look like liabilities. A theory emerged, first published in a fringe journal, then picked up by major outlets. Earth hadn't been overlooked. We had been avoided. We were the galactic equivalent of a biohazard zone. Too wild, too unstable, too chaotic to be worth consuming. And the moment we became predictable, the moment we reached critical levels of order, we'd light up like a flare in the dark. The Valethi, the theory said, wasn't hunting planets. It was hunting patterns. And Earth, for the first time in its messy history, was starting to look like a pattern worth noticing. Then, it took 3 weeks after the sphere shattered and the moon twitched. It happened. The sky changed, not visibly, at least not to the naked eye, but telescopes caught it. In the Oort cloud, beyond the edges of Pluto, one of our long-range probes, Vostok Array, sent back a single corrupted image before vanishing. It showed a gap in the star field, not a shadow, not a ship, a gap, as if something had erased part of the sky itself. Scientists tried to spin it. Cosmic dust, sensor failure. But the Tuned had already seen it in their dreams. They called it the mouth, and they said it wasn't coming. It was already here. That's when people started disappearing. Not the aliens, humans. All of them were connected to alien tech experiments. 5 researchers from MIT, a UN interpreter in Geneva, a shepherd in Kazakhstan. Each one vanished without a trace. No struggle, no evidence. Nothing, except in each case, a single word was found, scrawled or carved or burned into the walls. Remember. Underneath Ion, desperation began to bloom in the highest echelons of government. A new black budget project called Dissonance was formed. Its mission? Find a way to make Earth noisy again. Unpredictable, erratic. They began releasing synthetic memes into the population. Wild conspiracy theories, coordinated disinformation, AI-generated false events. It was all real. But none of it was true. The world didn't know it, but it was being deliberately destabilized in order to save itself. Tuned forums figured it out first. They started cataloging false flags, calculating pattern saturation in social networks. The more noise they found, the more convinced they became. Humanity's madness was now our firewall. But some wondered, was it enough? Was anything? And then came the day the refugees screamed, all at once, across every continent. Every one of them, dozens of ships, hundreds of beings, emitted a sound so loud, so low, that it wasn't heard with ears. It was felt. Hospitals reported thousands of people collapsing from sudden vertigo. Radio telescopes across the globe spiked with anomalous waveforms. Birds fell from the sky. Dogs howled. Oceans reverberated. And somewhere in Peru, a blind boy opened his mouth and spoke in perfect tandem with the sound. It has seen us. After the scream, the world held its breath. For 3 days, global infrastructure flickered like a dying candle. Satellites glitched. GPS networks fell into chaos. Half of the world's power grids experienced micro failures in the same repeating pattern, exactly 9 minutes and 14 seconds apart. No one could explain it. It wasn't just Earth that had felt the scream. The moon's surface cracked, not visibly, not at first, but deep scans show new fault lines spidering through the crust. Patterns that shouldn't exist. Perfect geometries in the regolith. like someone or something had etched circuitry into ancient stone. And then came the readings from the ocean floor. 2,900 kilometers west of Easter Island, a sonar mapping drone operated by a Chilean-Japanese research team sent back what should have been impossible. A symmetrical signal reflection, miles beneath the Pacific. Something solid, spherical, embedded in the bedrock. It wasn't metal. It wasn't rock. It was alien. And here's the part that changed everything. It had been there for over 3 million years. They called it the anchor. When deep-sea ROVs finally reached it, braving dangerous pressures and seismic disruptions, they found a structure not unlike the sphere seen in the alien ship. Perfectly black, featureless, yet humming with faint vibrations that made recording equipment stutter. Every attempt to interact with it failed. Lasers scattered. Robotic arms glitched. Sensors recorded false proximity data, as if space itself was bending near the object. And above all, the refugees grew terrified. For the first time, they moved toward something. They walked. Those same beings who had barely moved since landing. Toward coasts, toward ships, toward the water. They wanted to go home. But not to the stars, to the anchor. A break came when an independent linguist, Dr. Liana Coates, developed what she called resonant mnemonic alignment. By combining patterns from the tune's dream logs with the subharmonics emitted by the anchor, she was able to create a language-like interface. Not to control it, to remember it. That's when we learned the most disturbing truth yet. The anchor was not alien. It was human. Not made by modern humanity, no, but by something we were. Something we'd been eons ago. Before the glaciers. Before Homo sapiens. There had been another us. Not in fossil record, not in bones, but in memory. Hidden, lost, and locked beneath the sea. The anchor, it turns out, was a prison. Not for the Valethi, but for something much stranger. A version of ourselves that had tried to become gods. Through Dr. Coates' translations, we learned that long before recorded history, Earth had birthed a sentient civilization that reached for the stars, not with metal, but with thought. They discovered something fundamental, that reality could be bent with intention, that space-time responded to organized will. But they went too far. They tried to leave a mark, to become eternal. Instead, they attracted the unbeing, what the refugees now called the Valethi. Not an enemy, not a predator, but the antibody of the universe, erasing anything that sought permanence in a temporary cosmos. The Valethi wasn't evil. It was balance, and the only way to survive it was to forget. So humanity forgot. The entire species collapsed inward, locked its memory in the anchor, and let evolution begin again, resetting the clock. We weren't the first civilization. We were the last attempt. That revelation split the world. Some refused to believe it. Religious groups saw it as blasphemy. Politicians called it alien propaganda. But others, they felt a kind of vindication. Like the strange instincts humanity always carried. Our myths, our dreams of stars, our yearning for more, suddenly made sense. And the refugees? They didn't just recognize the anchor, they worshipped it. Because Earth was not just a safe place. It was a scar, a wound in the fabric of reality that the Valethi avoided. Because it remembered the last time something tried to overwrite its rules. Earth was the only place the Valethi wouldn't go. Not yet. But it's getting closer. The mouth in the Oort cloud was widening. Instruments stopped working near its edges. Time dilated. The stars behind it began to disappear. Not fade. Vanish. And the tuned began to lose control. Their dreams became violent. Many stopped sleeping. Some began speaking in multiple voices. One man in Denmark was filmed levitating during a blackout, murmuring a phrase that sent chills across the internet. It is not coming to kill us. It's coming to ask if we remember what we did. Then something unprecedented happened. One of the refugee ships activated. Not through tech, through the refugees themselves. They formed a circle around it, folded their bodies into an impossible geometry, and simply became light. The ship unfolded like a flower, rose into the sky, and projected an image visible for hundreds of miles. A mirror. Not metaphorically, literally. It showed each viewer their reflection, but altered, not as they were, but as they might have been, in another version of Earth. Some saw beauty. Some saw horror. One woman in Kenya saw herself standing on the surface of a red gas giant, surrounded by others like her, burning but smiling. It was a message. You have been many things. What will you be now? And with that, the ship collapsed into nothing. Gone. Not destroyed. Evacuated. Project Hinterglass went dark. Its last known transmission included a single frame of Dr. Tulsani staring into a cracked mirror and whispering, "We built the anchor, but the lock is rusted." The final line of her report read, "They didn't bring the Valethi with them. We did." Now, Earth stands at a crossroads. The Valethi is near. The refugees grow dimmer by the day, as if their hope fades with every breath. The anchor pulses louder, reacting to proximity. And humanity has a choice. We can, 1. Open the anchor, reclaim our forgotten power, become what we were, and fight the Valefi directly, risking everything. Seal it forever. Sacrifice advancement for survival. Remain hidden and accept a lesser, but longer existence. Or try something never done before. Integrate. Let the refugees become part of us, not as rulers, not as guests, but as kin. A new species, a new humanity. Neither what we were, nor what we are, but what we must become to survive the galaxy that comes next. As we record this story tonight, signals from the mouth continue to corrupt every major satellite. Global memory is degrading. Archives are failing. Random people report sudden knowledge of things they never studied. Languages they never learned. Some believe the Velethi doesn't need to destroy us. It only needs to remind us of what we once were, what we once tried, and what the price of immortality really is. So I ask you, dear listeners, when the stars go out, when memory itself trembles, when something knocks not from space, but from within, will you answer, or will you pretend you never heard the scream? They say the greatest fear isn't death. It's remembering why you're alive. After the refugees scream, the activation of the anchor, and the vanishing of one of the alien ships, global consciousness entered a strange phase. It wasn't panic. It wasn't peace. It was something like an eerie calm. As if everyone, across every nation, every language, had finally accepted something unspoken. This wasn't just their story. It had always been ours. The world's leaders met in a secret summit in Nuuk, Greenland, chosen because it was one of the few places still untouched by the tuned phenomenon. They debated, shouted, cried, and eventually agreed on a plan known only by its code name, Protocol Echo. It was a collective decision to open the anchor, not out of hubris, not even out of desperation, but because waiting to be forgotten was no longer an option. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was us before fear. And it all ended the moment that version of us tried to preserve itself. The day the anchor opened, it wasn't dramatic. There were no earthquakes, no beams of light. It simply breathed, a slow exhalation that reversed gravity for exactly 6 seconds. During that time, people floated, oceans bulged, time hiccuped, and then everything returned to normal. Except it wasn't. For the first time, the Valethi responded. The mouth spoke. No sound, just thoughts broadcast into the minds of everyone on Earth. And this is what it said. You are not what you remember. You are what you deny. The refugees fled a war, but the war began here. You are not a hiding place. You are the first sin. Panic didn't follow. What came instead was a deep, planetary introspection. People stopped working. Entire cities paused. Billions watched the skies. Some took their own lives, unable to process the implication, but others felt something else. Relief. As if, for the first time, the weight made sense. That anxiety we could never name, the darkness we always sensed behind the stars. Maybe it wasn't just fear of the unknown. Maybe it was memory, trying to crawl back home. 3 major things happened in the days that followed. First, the refugees began to change. Their light grew darker, not dimmer, but richer. Some began to take on human features more permanently. Their limbs restructured. Their speech improved. They started using names, not ones they chose, but ones humans spontaneously knew when speaking to them. Not assigned, remembered. One child in Alaska looked at a refugee for the first time and said, "You were my mother before the stars burned." Second, the moon cracked completely. But instead of shattering, it hollowed. A perfect hexagonal cavity formed at the center of the impact basin near the South Pole. Inside, a mirrored sphere, another anchor. This one wasn't human. It was Velethi. And it wasn't a prison. It was a seed. Third, a machine woke up. In the Nevada desert, buried beneath the ruins of a Cold War satellite project, a dormant AI system designated Sable came online without power. Sable wasn't just a defense system. It was built during the 1970s, before the internet, as a fail-safe. A closed loop designed to activate only if humanity faced a non-terrestrial extinction threat. It spoke 3 words through a broken terminal. Dot. We did this. When investigators dug into its code, they found files from before digital memory existed. Ancient patterns embedded in electromagnetic fields. Somehow, Sable had been waiting. But for what? Dr. Coates was the first to connect the final dots. In a live stream watched by over 300 million people, she presented what she called the mirror hypothesis. Her theory? The Velethi isn't an alien force. It's us, or rather, a reflection of us. Not from space, from outside time. The unbeing isn't a monster. It's the echo of a species that tried to defy entropy and failed. Every time we reach too far, it reappears. not to punish, but to remind. The Valethi is not coming to destroy us, she said. It is coming to show us who we've already become in a timeline we're not supposed to remember. And the refugees, they were never from another galaxy. They were from a different version of Earth. A version that failed. A version that unlocked the anchor too soon and invited annihilation. They fled through dimensional seams, through wormholes torn by collapsing civilizations. They fled to this Earth because we hadn't made the same mistake yet. They didn't come to be saved. They came to warn us. And now, we've remembered. The question is, what do we do with that memory? In the final days, before the mouth reached its widest point, Earth did something radical. We connected, every language translated, every refugee embraced, every remaining government dissolved their alien containment policies. A single planetary broadcast was sent, not just to the mouth, but to the sky itself. We remember. We will not repeat. But we will not hide. The response didn't come in words. It came in silence. The mouth stopped expanding. The sky held its breath. And then, something unbelievable happened. The Valethi, if that's even what it was, left. Not entirely. Not forever. But it pulled back. The stars behind it returned. The gravitational distortions eased. Memory stabilized. The anchor stopped pulsing. And the second sphere inside the moon, it opened. But there was no light, no machine, no threat. Just one object floating inside. Dot. A mirror. Identical to the one the alien ship had once projected. And for those who dared to look into it, they saw nothing. Not themselves. Not the future. Nothing. A perfect, silent reminder that the only way to survive the universe is to live as if you don't own it. It's been 38 days since the mouth retreated. The tuned are still dreaming, but less violently. The refugees, now called the returned, live among us, not as guests, but as family. Some have taken human form. Others remain as they were. There are no borders anymore. No world governments, not in the old sense. Earth is now a cooperative refuge, open, but cautious. The stars are silent again. But no one looks at them the same way. Maybe none of it is. But as your host and your fellow traveler under this vast, haunted sky, I leave you with one final theory, a personal one. What if the Valethi wasn't just an echo? What is every time we dream of reaching the stars, and every time we fear the dark between them, it's not because something out there is watching us. It's because we are watching ourselves. Across time, across choices, across the multiverse of what could have been. And every version of us that failed leaves a warning behind. This was ours. This time, we remembered. This time, we might just survive. A bright stop. Thank you for joining me on this journey. You've been listening to Space Story, where we drift into the unknown and return with something worth thinking about. I'm Henry, and whether you're here on Earth or far beyond, stay curious, stay chaotic, stay human. Good night.